This is a LSD and diazepam trip report by Joebro, posted to Arrowhead.org on January 19, 2007. I have taken acid 20 times before this day. I have had a few hard trips, and in fact, none of my trips have been completely pleasant. That is the nature of the beast. I have always learned something valuable from each experience. I have no regrets about the past. I do not often write experience reports, but this one struck me as important because I have not seen many reports that consider the amount of sleep a person has had before a psychedelic session. The setting for this trip was the third and final day of a large music festival. I had been helping out with the organization and also partying. Because of the work and the constant dancing, I had only 4 to 5 hours of sleep each night. In addition, for the last week I had been smoking about half a gram of very strong cannabis each day. That amount is roughly 5 times what I normally use. The combination of chronic sleep deprivation and heavy cannabis use created a fragile baseline. The day was a beautiful Sunday afternoon. The sky was a clear blue, the sun was warm but not scorching, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh grass and distant food stalls. Thousands of people moved in waves across the fields, dancing, laughing, and sharing drinks. The vibe was one of collective happiness. I felt a pull to use the day for something more than just exhaustion. I wanted to seek musical inspiration and perhaps uncover some personal issues that I had not yet faced. A friend offered me a dose of liquid LSD. He asked me whether I wanted a full dose or a half dose. I hesitated, humming and saying, "hot," unsure of what would be the better option. He smiled, grinned, and made the decision for me. He gave me what he considered a full dose. I do not know the exact micrograms, but I can tell that it was a large amount because the first signs appeared within 10 minutes, and the sensation of the toilet cubicle door waving at me was noticeable at 15 minutes. I swallowed the liquid quickly, feeling the bitter taste linger on my tongue. The liquid was clear, almost like water, but I could feel the weight of the decision settle in my stomach. I felt a little unsettled and a little nervous as I walked back to my campsite. I thought that music might help to anchor me, so I put on a hat, picked up an astrojax, a small toy with 3 weighted beads on a string that can be spun and tossed, and made my way about 100 meters down the hill toward the main dance area. The area was shaded by a large marquee. I found a spot on the grass under the canopy and sat down. A juggler was performing nearby, twirling silver clubs with a fluid rhythm. He told stories with his movements, speaking about the hard work that goes into juggling, about the endless practice under the sun, and about the belief that one can keep improving forever. I watched him, feeling the bright sunlight on my face and the cool shade on my back. My mind began to drift, but it was hard to describe exactly how. A man sitting next to me asked about the astrojax I was holding. I explained that it was a toy, that you can spin the beads and make them fly. He seemed interested, so I stood up to demonstrate. As soon as I tried to spin the beads, they tangled into a knot. I felt a sudden frustration, and I had to sit back down. The knot seemed to symbolize something in my head, a small obstruction that refused to be solved. Around this time, paranoid thoughts began to surface. I thought perhaps there had been a mass dosing, that everyone around me was also just beginning to trip hard. I watched a woman stagger into the shade from the sun, and I wondered what she might be feeling. I thought about the implications of a mass dosing situation. For a moment I shouted, "Fan-fucking-tastic," as loud as I could, startling a few people even over the music. The shout snapped me back to a more ordinary sense of self for a few seconds. I felt a little silly, and I decided to watch the juggler again. He had already left the area, and my attention returned to the man sitting next to me. In my mind, he transformed into an undercover police officer. I imagined that the LSD was being used as a mind control device, a way to keep outspoken people isolated and sterile. The music that was playing seemed bland and a little ominous. A truck rolled in, releasing a thick, sour smell as it emptied a porta-potty. The stench mixed with the dust, and my thoughts about government chemical control seemed to be confirmed by the scene. The truck moved out again. Someone raised an umbrella that read Peace Festival. The DJ switched the track to something more upbeat. I thought, no, they nearly got me, but I am not falling for that. I imagined that the DJ was being paid to endorse the substance, and I chortled at the idea. At the same time, I realized that someone had found the cell phone I had left to charge backstage. I sensed that they were about to tell me that my partner had sent a text message saying she was pregnant. I saw a girl approaching me, holding a plastic bag that contained a tangled coil of black cable. She moved slowly, as if she were aware that the air around us had become thicker with the smell of the porta potty and the low thrum of the bass. When she reached my side, she lifted the bag and placed the cable on the concrete, the plastic crinkling under her fingers. A voice from somewhere behind the DJ booth shouted, "2 months!" And the words struck me like a sudden flash of lightning. The girl smiled, a thin, nervous smile, and handed me the charger. I plugged the cable into my phone, the screen lighting up with a single message. "We are having a baby. 2 months." My heart pounded in my chest as if a drum were beating inside a hollow tube. I stared at the words, at the white letters on the black background, and felt a wave of joy rise up, then crash back down into a hollow ache. I could hear the crowd around me chanting, could see the flicker of lights on the stage, but my focus narrowed to the tiny rectangle in my hand. I thought of the future, of a child, of the responsibility that would come with it. I felt both the weight of that responsibility and the bright excitement of new life. My throat tightened, and a single tear rolled down my cheek, catching the light of the stage and turning it into a small, shining bead. At that moment, the sky above the dome seemed to open. A bright white disk rose slowly from behind the speakers, expanding until it filled the entire field of vision. The disk was not a sun. It was a pure, unfiltered light that seemed to pulse in time with the bass. The colors of the festival, the neon greens, the deep blues, the pinks of the banners, all faded into a single humming white. I felt my skin vibrate with the frequency of the music, as if every cell in my body were a drumhead being struck. The crowd around me became a blur of silhouettes, moving in slow motion, their faces soft and indistinct. I could hear their laughter, their shouts, but they sounded distant, like echoes in a cavern. My thoughts turned to the text message again. I imagined holding a newborn in my arms, feeling the small weight, the warmth of a breath against my skin. I imagined the future, the sleepless nights, the endless love. The feeling was overwhelming, a mixture of euphoria and fear. I felt a sudden urge to shout, to proclaim my joy to the universe, but my voice stayed locked in my throat. Instead, I raised my arms, and the crowd responded with a wave of hands, as if they could feel the same surge of emotion. The DJ, who had just switched the track, now played a track with a steady, hypnotic beat that seemed to match the rhythm of my heart. I could feel the beat in my chest, in my throat, in the space behind my eyes. The light grew brighter, and the edges of my vision began to melt away. I saw patterns forming on the surface of the white disk, spirals, lines, geometric shapes that shifted and rearranged themselves. I felt as though I were looking at a screen that was projecting the thoughts of everyone around me. I could sense the collective intention of the crowd, to dance, to celebrate, to be present. I felt my own intention merge with theirs, a single thread of purpose that pulled me forward. My body began to move without my conscious decision. My feet found the ground, my hands rose, and I began to sway, then spin, then jump. The movement felt effortless, as if I were a puppet whose strings were being pulled by the music itself. The peak of the experience lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like an eternity. The white light began to recede, the colors of the festival returning in a cascade of neon. The disk dissolved into 1,000 tiny points of light that flickered across the sky like fireflies. The music shifted again, this time to a slower, more melodic track with a heavy bass line that seemed to vibrate the very air. I felt my mind settle into a state of calm awareness. The panic that had been building earlier faded, replaced by a deep sense of acceptance. I could still hear the voice that had shouted, 2 months, but it now sounded distant, like a radio station far away. The text message remained on my phone, its words still glowing, but I no longer felt the need to read them again. I simply held the phone in my hand, feeling the cool plastic against my palm. The plateau settled in. The music continued. The crowd moved in a wave of bodies that rose and fell like an ocean. I found myself surrounded by people who were smiling, who were dancing, who were shouting words of encouragement. A man in a bright orange shirt approached me and said, "You are doing great, brother." I nodded, unable to form words, and felt a sudden surge of gratitude. A friend I had not seen in weeks, a fellow volunteer who had helped set up the sound system, clapped me on the back and whispered, "You are safe." I felt the weight of the Valium that I had taken earlier in the day begin to surface. The first dose of diazepam, a small white tablet I had swallowed after a brief conversation with a friend who thought I might need something to calm my nerves, began to work its way through my bloodstream. I felt a gentle loosening of the tightness in my chest, a softening of the edges of my thoughts. I sensed a shift in the crowd's energy. The DJ, noticing my altered state, began to play a track that was more melodic, with synths that sounded like distant bells. The beat slowed, and the crowd's movements became more fluid, more graceful. I felt my own body respond in kind, moving with a languid ease. My mind began to wander, and images appeared behind my closed eyes. I saw a field of tall grass, the sun low on the horizon, a small house in the distance. I saw a woman with dark hair standing at a kitchen table, her hands moving as if she were preparing a meal. I heard a child's laughter echoing across the field. The images were vivid, but they did not feel like dreams. They felt like memories of a life I had not yet lived. A wave of fatigue washed over me, not the heavy, crushing fatigue of exhaustion, but a gentle heaviness that made my limbs feel as if they were made of warm, pliable rubber. My thoughts slowed, and I found myself focusing on the simple sensations of my body. The pressure of the ground beneath my feet, the rhythm of my breathing, the thump of my heart. I realized that my mind was still active, still processing the flood of emotions that had come with the text message, but it was doing so with a calm curiosity. I thought about the future, about the child, about the responsibilities that would come. I imagined teaching the child about music, about festivals, about the feeling of being part of a crowd that moves as one. I felt a deep love for this imagined child, a love that was pure and unfiltered. The plateau continued for what seemed like an hour, though the actual time passed much more quickly. The sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the dome. The lights on the stage turned a soft amber, and the crowd's shadows stretched long across the ground. The music shifted again, now to a slower, more introspective track with a repeating piano motif. I felt my eyes grow heavy, but I did not want to leave the experience. I wanted to stay in this space, to let the music and the feelings wash over me. At some point, a friend who had been watching me closely approached with a small bottle of liquid. He whispered, "You are going too far. Let us help you." He placed a few drops of the liquid on a spoon and offered it to me. I could not refuse. I swallowed the drops, feeling a warm, bitter taste spread down my throat. The effect was immediate. My mind seemed to settle further, the colors dimmed, the edges of my thoughts softened. I felt a wave of calm that was deeper than any I had felt before. My breathing became slow and even. The music continued, but now it sounded like a distant hum, as if I were listening from far away. Soon after, a couple of volunteers came over with a blanket and gently guided me to a shaded area behind the stage. They helped me lie down on the ground, covering me with the blanket. I felt the cool grass against my skin, the faint scent of earth and incense. I could still hear the music, but it was muffled, like a radio playing in another room. My eyes closed, and I slipped into a state that was somewhere between sleep and wakefulness. I felt my body become heavy, my limbs sinking into the ground. I could sense the presence of the volunteers, their hands on my shoulders, their voices low and soothing. They told me to breathe, to let go, to trust that I was safe. While I lay there, my mind drifted. I felt as though I were floating above my own body, looking down at the scene with a detached curiosity. I saw the crowd moving, saw the lights flickering, saw the faces of people I had spoken to earlier. I felt a sense of separation, as if I were a witness to my own life rather than a participant. In that state, I experienced a series of vivid images that felt like memories from another time. I saw a large wooden table in a dimly lit room, surrounded by people who were laughing, who were sharing food. I saw a young woman with a bright smile handing me a slice of bread. I heard a voice that sounded like my own, saying, "You are the creator of this moment." The voice was gentle, not demanding. It seemed to come from somewhere deep inside, from a place that was both familiar and strange. The experience continued for a long while. I felt as though I were moving through different scenes, each one a fragment of a larger story. In one scene, I was walking through a forest, the trees tall and green, the sunlight filtering through the leaves. In another, I was standing on a beach, the waves crashing gently against the shore, the sand warm under my feet. In each scene, there was a sense of peace, a sense that I was exactly where I needed to be. The Valium continued to work, and my anxiety faded completely. I felt a deep sense of trust in the universe, in the people around me, in the music that continued to play. Eventually, the volunteers began to stir me gently.